I thought I was just there to hang a few shelves, until she leaned in close and whispered, "Don't tell my sister." I didn't think much of it at first. A casual text from a friend. Her sister needed someone handy to help put up some shelves. I had a free afternoon, and honestly, I didn't mind lending a hand. I figured it would be quick work, a bit of drilling, a few screws, maybe some small talk, and I'd be on my way. But the moment she opened the door, everything I'd assumed about that day quietly shifted. She stood there with a smile that was polite but restrained, like she was used to greeting people at arm's length. She wasn't dressed up for company, just a soft cream blouse tucked loosely into jeans, sleeves pushed up as though she'd been doing something before I arrived. But there was an ease in the way she carried herself, a confidence that immediately caught me off guard. Her hair was tied back in a loose knot, though a few strands had escaped, brushing against her cheek. When she tucked one behind her ear, the movement seemed so natural, so quietly graceful, I found myself watching longer than I should have. "Come in," she said, her voice steady, carrying that mix of warmth and formality you hear from someone who doesn't often let people pass the doorway. The smell of fresh coffee lingered in the air as I stepped inside. It mingled with something softer, maybe her perfume, a faint, floral trace that seemed to hang near her. Sunlight spilled across the living room, catching in the framed pictures on her wall, and painting golden edges across her figure as she guided me toward the space where she wanted the shelves installed. I told myself to focus on the task. Drill, anchors, screws, simple. But every detail seemed to carry weight. The way her bracelets slid softly against her wrist when she gestured. The way her smile flickered slightly when our eyes met, as though she wasn't sure if she wanted me to notice her or not. She spoke about where the shelves should go, her tone practical, yet I could sense something unspoken beneath her words. Maybe it was just me, standing there, younger, uncertain, trying not to stare. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more in the air than just the dust I was about to stir up with my drill. When she paused to fetch the measuring tape, I let myself breathe in the quiet. The room felt lived in but orderly, like every book and cushion had its place. It wasn't sterile though, it carried her touch. And in that moment I realized this wasn't just about shelves. Something about being alone with her in that space felt different. Charged, almost. A simple favor had suddenly become something far more delicate, something I wasn't sure I was prepared for, but couldn't walk away from either. And when she returned, standing a little closer than before, handing me the tape with a small, knowing smile, I had the strange, undeniable thought that this afternoon was about to change more than her living room walls. I got to work quickly, hoping the rhythm of the task would settle my nerves. The drill in my hand, the faint scent of wood and plaster rising as I marked the wall, all of it gave me something to focus on besides the quiet presence at my side. But she didn't drift off to another room, as most people do when someone's working in their house. No, she stayed close. Not hovering awkwardly, but present, steady, like she wanted to be part of it. She passed me the pencil when I needed to mark the spot. She uncoiled the extension cord without asking. Her nearness became a constant, a warmth just inside the edge of my vision. At first, our conversations were practical. "Is that level?" she asked, tilting her head, eyes narrowing slightly as she looked at the line I'd drawn. "Not yet," I answered, stepping back, adjusting the tool in my hand. The words faded quickly, replaced by silence. Not an empty kind of silence, though. This was thicker, charged, as though the walls themselves had started listening in. The hum of the drill when I pulled the trigger seemed louder than it should have been, echoing off the hardwood floor. When I stopped, the room fell back into a hush that made me acutely aware of how close she was standing. It happened small at first. She reached to steady one of the boards as I aligned it against the wall, her fingers brushing mine. Just a light touch, accidental, probably, but the warmth of her skin startled me. I didn't pull back right away, and neither did she. Our hands lingered on the edge of the wood for half a heartbeat too long before she gently let go. I told myself not to read too much into it, but the truth was, that fleeting contact sent a current through me. My pulse quickened, and suddenly I was hyper-aware of everything, the faint trace of her perfume, The soft swish of her blouse when she moved, the sound of her breathing, slow, steady, close enough to feel. When I drilled the next hole, she leaned in again, holding the shelf firm with both hands. Her sleeve brushed against my arm. I could feel the heat of her body so close, even though we weren't touching directly. She didn't look at me, she kept her eyes on the wall, her jaw set with concentration. But I caught the slight curve at the corner of her lips, almost a smile, almost a secret. The silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It was alive, humming, full of something neither of us dared name. And as we worked side by side, I began to realize this was no ordinary afternoon. Each small brush of contact, each quiet glance, each shared pause felt like a conversation in itself, one where words would have only gotten in the way. By the time we stepped back to look at the first shelf mounted securely to the wall, I wasn't just noticing the wood, or the screws holding it in place. I was noticing her, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the quiet satisfaction in her eyes, the way the sunlight slid across her cheekbone. And though she said nothing, I could feel it. The silence between us had already built something stronger than the shelves ever could. We moved on to the next shelf, working in the same steady rhythm. She held the plank while I measured, her fingertips pressed lightly against the edge. I noticed the small details more than I should have, the faint pink of her nail polish, the way her hand didn't shake even as the weight of the board pressed down. She was steady, controlled, as though nothing could rattle her. But then, just as I marked the wall, her voice softened. "You know," she said, almost casually, "I don't usually let people help me with things like this." The words hung in the air. Not a complaint, not a statement of pride, more like an admission, one that cost her something to say. I glanced at her, trying to read the expression on her face. Her eyes weren't on me. They were on the wall, focused on the pencil line I'd just drawn, but there was a flicker of something else in her posture, the slightest drop of her shoulders, as if saying those words had released a hidden weight. "Really?" I asked quietly, careful not to push too hard. She gave the faintest nod. "I've gotten used to doing things myself. It's easier that way." She paused, lips pressing together. "Depending on people, doesn't always work out." It wasn't a dramatic confession. It was spoken simply, matter-of-factly, but I felt it all the same. A glimpse beneath the surface. For someone who carried herself with such confidence, it was strange, and strangely intimate, to hear her reveal even a small piece of vulnerability. I wanted to say something in return, something reassuring. To tell her she didn't have to do everything alone, that letting someone in didn't make her weaker. But my throat caught. I hesitated, afraid of crossing some invisible line. Instead, I just nodded, keeping my tone steady. "Well, I'm glad you let me help." She finally looked at me then, and her eyes softened. For a moment, the space between us seemed to shrink, like the invisible barrier she kept around herself had lowered, just slightly. The faintest smile tugged at the corner of her lips, not the polite smile from earlier, but something quieter, something real. I held the drill again, trying to focus, but her words lingered in my head. "Depending on people doesn't always work out." As I worked, I noticed how her hands brushed dust from the wood, how her fingers lingered on the surface as if grounding herself. She carried herself like someone who'd weathered storms and learned to stand tall on her own, but here, in this moment, she had chosen to stand close to me. The drill whirred back to life, echoing against the wall, but underneath the sound, I felt it, that delicate thread of trust she just extended. And even though it was just a small confession, it settled deep inside me. Because sometimes, the quietest truths carry the heaviest weight. We were halfway through tightening the brackets when the atmosphere shifted. Up until then, everything between us had been unspoken glances, small brushes of touch, and that steady silence charged with meaning. But as I knelt down to secure the final screw, I sensed her draw closer. Her footsteps were soft against the hardwood, but her presence pressed in, undeniable. She crouched beside me, not because she needed to, the shelf was steady enough, but because she wanted to be nearer. I could feel it. And then, in a voice so low I almost wondered if I imagined it, she said, Don't tell my sister you're here. I froze. The screwdriver slipped slightly in my grip. Her words weren't sharp or commanding, they were soft, careful, almost pleading. But they hit with the weight of a secret I hadn't known I was part of until that second. I turned my head to look at her. She was closer than I expected, her face just a breath away. Her eyes flicked toward the door as though she half expected someone to walk in at any moment. But then she looked back at me, and what I saw there wasn't fear exactly, it was something more complicated. A mix of hesitation and mischief, as though she knew how dangerous it sounded to say those words, but she couldn't resist saying them anyway. The air between us tightened. My pulse quickened, though I tried to steady my voice. Why not? I asked quietly. She shook her head faintly, strands of hair falling loose against her cheek. She wouldn't understand, she murmured, barely louder than the hum of the drill cooling in my hand. She sees things a certain way. And this? She hesitated, eyes lingering on me. This doesn't fit into it. Her breath brushed my ear as she leaned in, and for a moment the world shrank to that single point of closeness. The faint scent of her shampoo drifted around me, warm and floral, like spring carried inside her. My chest tightened, not from nerves alone, but from the unspoken suggestion hanging in her words, that whatever was happening here, whatever she felt, it wasn't meant to be seen. I swallowed, searching for a response, but nothing I could say felt adequate. So instead, I let the silence carry it. My gaze stayed on hers, and hers on mine, until the moment stretched almost too far. Finally, she drew back slightly, not breaking the tension but softening it. She straightened her blouse, smoothed her sleeve, as if returning to composure. But the damage was done, the line between us had shifted. That single confession, whispered in confidence, bound us together in a way no touch ever could. It was no longer just shelves, or glances, or brushes of hands. It was a secret, and secrets have a way of drawing people closer than they intend. And as I returned to the task, pretending to focus on screws and brackets, my hands were steady. But inside I knew, nothing about this afternoon was simple anymore. The shelves were almost finished. Just one more plank to tighten, one more bracket to lock into place. My focus should have been on the drill, on the screws, on making sure everything was aligned. But it wasn't. Not entirely. She was standing right beside me, closer than before, her hand already resting lightly on the edge of the wood as if to steady it. I told myself it was practical, that she was simply helping, but the truth was impossible to ignore. She didn't need to be that close. She chose to be. I lifted the drill, lining it with the final hole, and that's when it happened. The shelf wobbled slightly under the pressure, and instinctively she pressed her palm firmly against the other end to hold it steady. My hand slid forward at the same time, and suddenly, there it was. Her hand overlapped mine completely. For a split second, either of us moved. My knuckles brushed the softness of her palm, warm and steady, her skin smooth against the roughness of mine. The pressure of her hand wasn't light. It was deliberate, as if she meant to anchor us both in place. The shelf creaked faintly beneath our combined grip, but neither of us seemed to care. The drill buzzed once, then stopped, forgotten in my hand. All I could hear was the faint rhythm of her breathing beside me, slower than mine, but no less intense. I looked up, and she was already watching me. Her gaze wasn't playful or accidental. It was direct, steady, holding mine in a way that made the air between us feel impossibly small. There was no polite smile this time, no mask of casualness. Just something raw, unguarded, and a little dangerous. My throat went dry. Every instinct screamed to say something, to break the tension before it swallowed me whole, but no words came. And maybe words weren't needed. The silence spoke enough, the press of her hand against mine, the faint tremor that betrayed her calm, the way either of us pulled away. Seconds stretched, though it felt like much longer. My chest rose and fell faster than I wanted it to, and I wondered if she could feel the slight tremor in my hand under hers. If she did, she didn't let on. Her fingers only pressed more firmly, as though to steady not just the shelf, but me. Finally she blinked, her lips parting just slightly as if to say something, but nothing came. Instead, she let out a quiet breath, a sound that seemed to carry both release and restraint. Slowly, carefully, she lifted her hand away, leaving behind a phantom warmth on my skin that lingered even after she stepped back. I tightened the last screw, but my mind wasn't on the work anymore. It was on that moment, that fleeting, electric stillness where time seemed to stop, and where the smallest touch said more than either of us dared put into words. The shelves were standing now, strong and secure. But I couldn't help thinking that what had just passed between us, fragile, unspoken, undeniable, was far less steady, and far more dangerous. When the last screw slid into place, the task was officially done. The shelves stood straight, solid against the wall, perfectly aligned. It should have felt like an ending, the closing of a small favor I'd agreed to that morning. But instead, the room felt heavier, warmer, as though the work had only been the excuse, and now we had reached the real reason I was here. I unplugged the drill, coiling the cord slowly just to give my hands something to do. She stood a few steps away, arms folded loosely, watching me. Her expression was unreadable at first, but her eyes carried something I hadn't seen from her yet. Not confidence. Not polite restraint. Something softer. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice steadier than her posture. There was a faint tremor in the way her fingers pressed into her arm. "You really didn't have to spend your whole afternoon on this." I shrugged gently. "It's nothing. I didn't mind." She exhaled, not quite a sigh, but close. Her gaze dropped to the floor, then lifted again, and when she spoke next, her words were slower, almost hesitant. "You know, I don't usually let people this close. Not into my home, not into me." She paused, searching for the right words. "It feels dangerous. Like the moment I lean on someone, it could all fall apart." The honesty in her tone caught me off guard. It wasn't the kind of statement you prepare for in casual company. Her voice wasn't polished or rehearsed. It was raw, like something she'd kept hidden far too long. I set the drill aside and turned toward her fully. "I don't think it's dangerous," I said quietly. "At least, not with me." She let out a soft laugh, but it was hollow, fragile. Her hand lifted as if to brush hair from her face, but instead it found my arm, fingers settling just above my wrist, warm and deliberate. The contact was feather-light, yet it carried the weight of everything she couldn't say out loud. The touch sent a current through me. Her skin was warm, her grip uncertain, almost testing whether I would stay. I didn't move away. Instead, I let my own hand drift over hers, pressing gently, steadying her. Her breathing shifted, quicker now, and for a moment she closed her eyes. "This isn't supposed to happen," she whispered. "Not with you." I wanted to ask why. I wanted to push past the boundaries she'd drawn and tell her I already understood, that I already felt it too. But instead I held her hand more firmly, letting silence do the talking. The air between us grew still, thick with everything unspoken. My heart pounded in the quiet, but my touch stayed calm, deliberate, telling her without words that she wasn't alone, not in this moment. Her eyes opened again, glistening just slightly in the golden light filtering through the curtains. She searched my face, as if weighing whether to pull back or fall forward into whatever this was becoming. And as her fingers tightened ever so slightly on my arm, I realized the shelves weren't the only thing we had built that afternoon. We had built something far more fragile, and infinitely harder to hold. The shelves stood finished, perfectly aligned along her living room wall. Tools gathered at my feet, dust scattered faintly across the hardwood, the kind of mess that usually signals the end of a job. But nothing about this moment felt like an ending. She stood quietly a few feet away, arms wrapped around herself, her posture composed but her eyes still carrying that fragile openness she'd let slip only minutes before. I could feel the weight of what she'd said still hanging in the air, fragile and trembling like a note that hadn't fully faded. I bent down, slipping the drill and screws back into my bag. The sound of metal clinking against plastic seemed loud in the hush between us. My hands moved automatically, but my mind wasn't on the tools. It was on her, the way her voice had softened, the way her hand had clung to my arm as if it had taken everything in her to do it. When I straightened again, she was closer. Not too close, just enough that I could see the faint curve of a smile trying, and failing, to form on her lips. "I meant what I said earlier," she murmured, her voice low, careful. "Please, don't tell my sister." Her tone wasn't commanding this time. It was gentle, almost vulnerable, like she wasn't just asking for silence, she was asking for care. For trust. I nodded. "You don't have to worry. It'll stay between us." For the first time all afternoon, she seemed to truly relax. Her shoulders lowered, her breath eased. She stepped closer then, slow and deliberate, as if weighing every inch of ground between us before she crossed it. And then, without a word, she leaned forward. Her arms slipped softly around my waist, and her cheek rested against my chest. The suddenness of it stole my breath. She wasn't holding me tightly. It wasn't that kind of embrace. It was tender, testing, almost cautious. But her warmth seeped through me instantly, her heartbeat steady against my ribs. My own arms rose hesitantly at first, then with more certainty, folding around her. I held her carefully, as though she were something rare, something fragile I wasn't sure I deserved to touch. The room was silent but alive. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock on the wall, the distant hum of a car passing outside, the whisper of her breath sinking slowly with mine. Time seemed to blur, stretching in that embrace until nothing else existed. She didn't say anything, and neither did I. Words would have only broken the spell. Instead, I let the warmth of her cheek pressed against me, the quiet strength of her presence in my arms, speak for both of us. When at last she pulled back, it wasn't abrupt. It was slow, reluctant, as though part of her didn't want to let go. Her eyes lingered on mine, soft and searching. The shelves were finished. The task was done. But as I picked up my bag and glanced back one last time, I knew what we had built between us mattered more than any piece of wood or bracket. Something fragile, unspoken, and unforgettable. And as I stepped out into the fading light of the evening, I carried it with me, the warmth of her embrace, and the quiet certainty that this day had changed us both. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more slow burn romance tales. Your likes and comments help keep these stories alive, and I'd love to hear your thoughts below.